Okay. Um, so it's Thursday night, and I just finished the Siyum, and I think since I took the trouble to write something up right over the Siyum, I think I'll share it with you on Ksubis in case anybody's interested. It has to do to a certain degree with contemporary politics because I'm finishing Ksubis, and since I did a week or two ago, think about the Shalosh Shavuos, and that's all got it at the end of Ksubis. So I wrote a piece up on that, and so you'll. Here we go. This is in my mother's memory. Her yahrtzeit is actually tomorrow night. I thought it was 2 days in Thomas, but it's 3 days in Thomas. Same day as Lubavitcher, Rebbe. So this Shabbos. We did to see him tonight. Tomorrow, I hope, as I said before, I expect to be in Lakewood. It won't work out. Oh, so here we go. I'm reading you what I wrote. Since I'm finishing Subas, which I haven't done in many years, my attention was drawn to the extensive Agadah at the end, particularly the controversy around the Shalosh Shavuos, or the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of the state of Israel. The controversy revolves around the 3 times in Shir Shir, when you have the pasuk 3 times, Hishbati eschem benos Yerushalayim, b'tzvaos habaylos asodim to'iru, v'im to'ru eso avad shetechbotz, which I translate as, daughters of Jerusalem, I have charged you by oath, b'tzvaos habaylos asodim, by the gazelles and by the doves of the field. Do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Don't push things before it's ready. Without repeating the complicated back and forth in the Gemara, it boils down to the Shalosh Shavuos, the 3 oaths. Number 1, Achash shelo yalu b'choma, or kechoma, depending. V'achash sheshbi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael shelo yimradu mizolam. They shouldn't come together in a great wall, and they shouldn't come, meaning a mass invasion of Israel. They shouldn't rebel against the Goyim and the Golas. And the third oath was to the Goyim. That God made the Goyim swear that they won't torture the Jews too much. They won't enslave the Jews more than necessary. By the time you have back and forth in the Gemara, and I believe many of you have learned this, by the time the dialogue in the Agadah is over, there's another 3 Shavuos in there because of the double Lashon, Ta'ir and Ta'aru. And therefore you have a total of 6 Shavuos. The other 3 are Shlo Yigalu as a case, Shlo Yirachaku, or maybe Yidachaku as a case, but Shlo Yigalu Asod Lumas Olam. One more thing, there is a consequence for violating these oaths. Amr Abelazar, Amr L'Makadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, if you stick by the shvua, you keep your part. Mutav, pimlav, ani matiras besarchem, kitzivos ukailos asodet. Then I'll make you like the deer and the gazelles, which are helpless. People hunt them and kill them. So you'll end up being massacred. As I said, there's a famous disagreement in the last 100 years, 150 years, whatever, less, over the nature and validity of this Agadah as far as the theological legitimacy or illegitimacy of the state of Israel. In other words, totally separate from the problem that, let's say, the Zionists, the founders of the Medina, were not from, which is a problem that could be fixed because they could become from, or the people in Israel today possibly could become from. Separate from that problem is the theological problem, according to this view, that God does not want the Jewish people to set up a state under any circumstances, even if all the Jews would be very firm. The etzem making of a state, according to this, indeed the etzem phenomenon of a mass immigration, that's kechoma, is theologically wrong and a big sin according to this. It will only change when God decides to send the Mashiach and not before. This is the thesis, as is well known, of the Satmarov in his famous Maimer al Shalosh Shavuos on this. Indeed, since the founding of Zionism, according to him, since the founding of Zionism was followed by the Holocaust, because Herzl was like 1890s, and 40 years later is Hitler, it is evident, Heinous, that the Shoah was a kim of the threat mentioned in the Gemara of Eliezer. Imatem makayim misashvuos mutavim lam ani matiris damchem kedam tzivos ukailos asad. I'll be marked to your blood, you'll get killed. This is the Satmar theology. One of the key issues in modern times, that's the only time it's been Nogea, it's a Gemara, and a Medrash too. And down the centuries, you have different Mefarshim who commented, explicated this Medrash, hundreds of years ago. But in that time, it never occurred to them, this is a question, until the 20th century, until the rise of modern Zionist movement, one Hava made that this would actually be pulled off to get a Jewish state in some form or another, short of a total nace. So one of the key issues in modern times revolves around the surely unforeseen unique feature of the 20th century. And the unique feature of the 20th century is Ummos Ha'olam came together. First you had the League of Nations and the United Nations. I'm not finished. And the League of Nations in 1920 and the United Nations in 1947 said that they're mosking to a Jewish state in Israel and Palestine. Okay? There never had been in history a League of Nations which all the Ummos Ha'olam joined. And obviously, there never was that both should vote to set up in 1920 a national home for the Jewish people, because they implemented the language, they included in the League of Nations the language of the Balfour Declaration. And in 1947, they actually, as we all know, voted for partition, which means in part of Israel to be a Jewish state. Okay? Now, the language of the oath was, Sheshbiya Kadosh Baruch Hu Shelo Yimredu B'Ummos Ha'olam. They shouldn't be mored, they shouldn't rebel against the Goyim. This sounds like the problem is Merida, going against the Goyim. But if the Goyim agreed, then there's no Merida. This is the other side of the argument. Okay? This was said by Or Sameach after the San Remo Treaty of 1920, when they confirmed that part of the Middle Eastern settlement of the Versailles Treaties. And he said, I'm reading from the Or Sameach's proclamation, Ko'es, Heiseba Ashkocha, now divine presence is so mandated, Asher Basifas HaMamlochas Norris for San Remo, and they're gathering all the enlightened nations in San Remo. It's called the League of Nations. Nitin Saba Sheretz Yisrael Tili Am Yisrael. There was given a tzav, a command that Israel should be given for the Jewish people. Now this is to tell you the truth in oversimplification, but nevertheless, the British weren't Mekayim it, but it said that the world is giving Palestine to the British as a mandate, sort of like for a while, for the purpose of implementing the Balfour Declaration. So, therefore, he says, Kivon Shesar Pachad HaShavuos, the Rishon Malachim, so since there's now been removed the Pachad HaShavuos, any fear of violating the Shalosh Shavuos, and you have Rishon HaMalachim, permission of the kings and the rulers of the world, Kama Mitzvahs Yishav Eretz Yisrael, Shkol Mexico, Lamakalim. Then we pop up once again with the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. No, the problem was the three Shavuos. The problem was the Goyim wouldn't agree. Now the Goyim have agreed. Now, I'm saying who's right and who's wrong. I'm simply pointing out that clearly, Torah Sameach is saying that if you have the Ummos Ha'olam say it's okay, then it's okay. It's not called Merida. Now, the Or Sameach wrote this as a proclamation, not as a tshuva, without a discussion, the whole issue of the Shalosh Shavuos. I mean, he doesn't go into the Gemara back and forth. The Avnei Nezer, who lived a little bit earlier, Avnei Nezer died around 1900, in Tzachachov, has an extensive tshuva, a long one, I have it right here, on this whole matter of this Agadata, as part of a larger discussion of Mrs. Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael B'Zman Hazeh. It's a very thoughtful discussion. I think it has 60 paragraphs. And it's a whole consideration, a whole matter. He too says, like the Or Sameach, that if the Ummos Ha'olam say it's okay, then it's okay. The Satmaro has a very good retort, I have to say. And that is, the Ummos Ha'olam means the Arabs. Those ones in Nogea. The United Nations doesn't count. If the people in the Middle East said it's okay, it's a different story. Which they didn't. You see? The Arabs fight it tooth and nail. So the UN doesn't count. League of Nations doesn't count. The Ummos Ha'olam means the ones who are affected. Which is an interesting time. Now, the discussions and debates on this are endless. I looked online, there are two separate internet universes. Satmar, say Rav Kook, two different sides on this. I just want to concentrate on one Nakuda. A point raised by Avnei Nezer, which tickled my interest. A very fundamental point in my opinion. This Shlomo Melch business is a pasuk or set of psukim in Shir Hashem. Shir Hashem is written by Shlomo. So Shlomo is saying Yishbati Yischem B'nos Yerushalayim. Why? How? When? When did this take place? In what context did Shlomo administer Hishbati Yischem, the series of oaths? This is a question that attracted my interest, as it did, among other things, the Avnei Nezer, who says, Avnei Nezer, Im Ashvua Azos Hoysal De Shlomo, Shomer Hishbati Ruach HaKodesh, if you're telling me that it's in the Torah with Ruach HaKodesh, and Shlomo said, Hishbati B'nos Yerushalayim, Hoyim Aroy Sheyesim Shlomo Kol Yisrael. He comes as a Shua. How can Shlomo say, I'm Mashbia Klal Yisrael, without them getting together and saying we're having a session in which we're doing a tekes hashpa'ah, like they say nowadays, lahavdo. But that's what he had at Har Sinai, right? So Shlomo should have said, Hishbati Yisrael Shalom, get everybody together, maybe when they build a base of or whatever, and im ta'irubes avashet techbas. When does this happen? V'lo matzino, because those, you look in Tanakh, you never see such occasion. Now I'm sure the Psalm was like this. It was at another time, it wasn't there. But here, you still hear the word of the Avnei Nezer. Gam lo yitochen klal sheibasrim b'soros hagol v'yashbiyah. It's lo yitochen that he would tell him, guess what? In future times, long after Shlomo, there's going to be a golus and you don't get out of it. And what's the trouble with the third Shavua? There was Mashbiyah Goyim. When did God get together all the nations of the world, or the representatives, in some gathering and make them all take an oath not to be Mishabed Klal Yisrael Yosem Adai? Hey, Elohim, the Goyim never heard of this. These are problems that pop up when you take Haggadah literally. Now, in the history of Klal Yisrael, this Haggadah, the history of rabbinic literature, being in the Gemara, was often commented upon, particularly by your Ein Yaakov type Mefarshim or your Farshei HaMedrash, but it never really had a contemporary political relevance until the 20th century and the rise of modern Zionism. In other words, it was a subject of Haggadic speculation. Nevertheless, these Mefarshim end up being the coin of the realm in the 20th century debates and discussions. So if you find something from the Noda B'Yehuda, Yonasan Eibshitz, Shus Yaakov, whoever, commenting on this will become something you'll end up finding in the Satmar, in the Ein Mabana Smecha, in Rav Kook, and all these places. They're using these early century commentaries on the Haggadah, even though I don't know if those things meant it hard and fast. Thus, very often, one finds quoted of Yonasan Eibshitz in the Ahavas Yonasan in its Chanon, that the Shalosh Shavuos apply even if the Goyim give a green light, like happened in 1947. So you see Satmar, so I guess, see, the Ahavas Yonasan agrees with us. Same thing with the Afei Toar. He also learns that word in the context of dialectical discussions, I want to point out. That even if the Goyim say it's okay, you still can't go. Okay? The same discourse is found in the Ein Mabana Smecha, just he flips it. He'll find a Maimra, I don't know, a Drashas Noda B'Yehuda, thing from the Talmud Rashba, something from the Sheneber Rebbe, which favors his position. Meaning, commenting on this Haggadah, even though it's not like it's in the Gemara or anything like that. In that spirit, let's look at the question of the Avnei Nezer, which I thought was an interesting one. What is the precise context of these Psukim and Shir Hashirim? Not the literary context, necessarily. That would be very interesting. To look how the pasuk fits in with the rest of the Psukim around it. In that particular parak, appears 3 times. But rather the historical context, because that's who I am. As far as I can tell, there are 2 alternative scenarios in Chazal regarding Shir Hashirim. Either he wrote it in his old age or he wrote it when he was young. In the Seder Olam, which is very authoritative, the Seder Olam, it says he wrote Shir Hashirim in his old age. Aval Eis Zikna Shlomo Samuch Lemisaso Sharsa Olav Ruach HaKodesh V'Yamar Shlosha Sfarm Halolu Mishlei Shir Hashirim Koheles. So according to this, Shlomo wrote it when he was a Zokin. This, I'm sure, would follow the famous story that he was deposed and would be a Melech Hedit Melech. He started as a king, he was knocked out by Ashmedai or whatever, a revolution, and and then was restored to the throne at the end. So in other words, if you follow Melech Hedid Melech, here's a brief, summary of how it goes. Shlomo messed up with the Geisha wives. Hashem rebuked him, but he didn't listen. It says those words. Shlomo was then deposed, lost the throne, wanders and suffers, and he learned his lesson. Restored to his throne, and even to Ruach HaKodesh, but battered and chastened by his period of deposition. That's why he dies a premature old age, only 52. Shlomo composes, among other things, Shir Hashirim, which on the one hand celebrates Dveikus, yet at the same time sees the full significance, discerns the full significance of his having turned Klal Yisrael, his having messed up by introducing into Klal Yisrael those Noshim Asher Hitu Es Lavavo. Shlomo sees ruefully that the churches of Azara that his wives have erected on Har Zeisim, which lasted hundreds of years until Yoshio, we're told. He sees what the Korban they make, that the same Shlomo who built the Beis HaMikdash was responsible for laying the groundwork for its eventual Korban, which Hashem warned him about at the time of its construction. If you look in Malachim, here, let me get here, in chapter 9, where it talks about Shlomo building the Beis HaMikdash. See, you got to know a little bit of the Tanakh. When you look in the Beis HaMikdash, after it goes into detail how he built everything, and he had this big tefillah, and so on and so forth, right? So Shlomo, Vayem Hashem Elov, Shamati es tefilosei tefilosei asher eschananto lefanai. I've listened to your whole prayers and everything, building a Beis HaMikdash. Hikdashti es habayis hazeh, and I'll be mekadosh this house. Knows I agree. Eini v'libi sham kol yomim, and I will treat it as a Beis HaMikdash. Hashem says, V'yatah is for you, Shlomo. Im telich lefanai, kol David avicha b'sam le'b'vashem, and so forth. If you stay firm, like your father, hakim Moses kimal kol Yisrael kasher dibarto David avicha, then I'll take care of the way I take care of David. Okay. However, I'm warning you, Shlomo. Im shov teshuvah atem b'nechem acharav lo tishmu mitzvah gosai. But if you go off the derech, v'avatem lohim achim yishtachas lehem, and you go for idols or whatever, I'll wipe out the Jews, kick them out of Israel, and I'll destroy the Beis HaMikdash, Yisrael Moshe and Shil Kol Amin. And this great house, people will be shocked and they'll spit and stuff like that. And they'll say it's because they abandoned Hashem. So he did warn them that you're building a Beis HaMikdash that's very nice, but it only works if you keep the mitzvahs. You see? And so the same Shlomo built the temple was also responsible for laying the groundwork for its eventual destruction, which God warned him about in the time of the construction. I just read you the field that Hashem told him at the time it was built. Ascribing the shortcomings of himself and his generation to the fact, because Shlomo had the wisdom, that the Golus Mitzrayim had not been permitted to run its full course because the Jews had sunk to the 49th level of Tumah. So they should have been there for 400 years without any cheshbons. And the 400 years would totally purge them of their faults. But as can happen when somebody's having a very severe medical treatment, the treatment itself could kill you, And so Hashem's like, if they can't handle it more, they'll be by 50 Shari Tumah, it'll be impossible. I got to take them out early. But they left Mitzrayim not completely purged of their character faults. So Shlomo tells the Jewish people, we are going to have to go through all this another time. This time knows when the Golus happens again, in the future. You have to see things through. You have to endure until the divinely ordained terminus aquam. Otherwise, it's like stopping the chemo prematurely. Consequently, I say to you, Hishbati eschem benos Yerushalayim im to'iru v'im to'uru eso'ava asher techbutz. So it's not like Shlomo convened a public gathering in his old age and administered an oath. Rather, speaking with inspired foresight, Shlomo admonished the Jews in his old age that if they tamper with their divinely mandated destiny, they will face disaster. In other words, he was sharing with them a certain type of prophecy. He was sharing with them God's will, which was that the full purging effects of Golus had to run their course, though this would take place sometime in the distant future. If you tell me that Shlomo wrote in Shir Hashirim, and he's the one who says Ishbati, and you tell me like the Chazal say he wrote in his old age, I think you have to come up with some word like that. It's interesting to speculate on Shlomo's state of mind when he wrote this in his old age. He had to see at that point that Rechavam was coming after him, would mess everything up, and the kingdom would break apart. Indeed, Hashem told him that the kingdom would break apart. Hence his pessimism in Koheles, which was also written at the same time. So the bottom line is there was no Asifas Ha'umah or anything like that. But rather it was done, Shlomo, like sort of admonishing prophetically the Klal Yisrael. Hishbati Eschem. Why Golus? Why is it that the thing you have to endure? What's so great about Golus? Well, either you can say it breaks the Jews' insufferable arrogance and materialism, provided it runs its full course, which it didn't do in Egypt, which is why they made the golden calf when they were in trouble. Alternatively, there's some metaphysical necessity for Golus in the Bria. That, I'm sure you're aware of, is the famous Shita and approach of the Maharal Prague in his Netzach Yisrael. But I'm not into that. Now, there's another scenario, which is fascinating, which says that Shlomo wrote Shir Hashirim in his youth. Here we go for the Medrash Zuta, where it says, Shlosha Sforim Kosav, Shir Hashirim Mishlei Koheles. Shir Hashirim Kosav Bekatnuso, Mishlei Bialduso Bekoheles Meshehizkin. He wrote Shir Hashirim when he was young, Mishlei when he was a Yeled, and Koheles when he was old. But in what context? Here we have two alternative versions, which are fascinating. According to one, he wrote the 3 books when he reached 3 achievements. Shir Hashirim when he got rich, Mishlei when he got wisdom, Koheles when he got power. Okay? I'll read it to you in Hebrew. Shlosh Hashirim Omar Keneged Shlosh Milas Sha'olah. Barishon Vayitin Shlomo Melchus HaKesu Shlom Kavonim. So in other words, the Mila was the Kesef. HaMila Shniya Vater Chochma Shlom B'Takas Miyalam. He got the wisdom from God. Right? HaMila Shlishis wrote a B'chol that it was a powerful king who ruled, as we would say, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Okay. According to another version in that Medrash, he wrote the 3 books when he suffered 3 crashes, 3 misfortunes. What are the 3 misfortunes? Number 1, when he lost his foreign possessions, because if you look at the Sefer Malachim especially, you'll see that the provinces which David had conquered broke away. There's a whole story about Edom and Aram, Brazon Ben Yoda, and other groups. So the great empire of King David and Yoav, which they conquered through war, fell apart during the time of Shlomo, although he still retained Israel, and he made very good money, not through conquest, but through commerce. Read the book of Malachim. So the 3 crashes are as follows. When he lost his foreign possessions, when he lost the 12 tribes, it was left only with Yerushalayim, and when he lost Yerushalayim, and only had his bed and was deposed from his throne. Here it is in Hebrew. Davar Acher Shlosha Shirim Omar Keneged Shlosha Yeridos Shiyorad. Rishona Shai Melch Misofo Matsofo B'Nitzmata Malchusa B'Chazal Melch Yisrael Bavad. So the first one, we used to have a big empire, and now he didn't. He lost it, and now we only have the 12 tribes of Israel. Hayirida Shnia Shechazal Yos Melch Yerushalayim Bavad. So this is the story of Shlomo's being deposed from the throne. Whether it's the Ashmedai or some other reason, maybe people are angry at him. It's not in the book of Malachim at all, or Divrei Yamim, but it is very well known in the Agadah, in Gittin and elsewhere. And so Shlomo was deposed for a while. Hayirida Shlishis, Shamar Neisrael Mitos Valvad. And the third level was when he lost Ibn Yerushalayim, and as they say, only had his own bed and was terrified. So that's just very interesting. Okay? According to this, let's put it this way. He wrote Shir Hashim when he lost the provinces. He wrote Mishlei when he lost everything but Jerusalem. And he wrote Koheles when he even lost that. Now, according to this, it's very interesting. He wrote Shir Hashim when he was young, but had lost his foreign possessions. So in other words, when you read there, the rebellion of Edom and Aram happened very early in his reign, according to this. So although he was building the base of Mikdash in his early years, there were clouds on the horizon as he was losing his imperial possessions. My guess is as follows. That's all I ever have. A very intelligent Shlomo asked himself, what am I doing wrong? Why am I losing these provinces and territories conquered by my father? The answer, of course, his big sin. Shlomo's big sin when he was young, Bas Paro. The book of Malachim singles out this marriage as a particularly egregious sin and blunder. Listen how the pasuk says, "V'hamelech Shlomo ohav es noshim nachrios rabos v'yes Bas Paro." Hear it? He had all these shiksas and Bas Paro. Notice that's equal to all these things. They're all bad. Chazal say famously that the Roman Empire was founded on the day he married Bas Paro. I'm sure you've heard this. Amar Yehuda Shmuel b'shah shenosa Shlomo es Bas Paro yard Gavriel v'noatz konabiyam v'helos cherton ubo nivna krach gol shabaroma. So that's their way of saying that this led to a whole chain of events which took the Jews down. In other words, the future exile and destruction was from Shlomo's marrying, had its origin in Shlomo marrying Bas Paro. Chazal blast Shlomo and his behavior at his wedding to Bas Paro. Rabbi Shmuel, ba'osa laila shehishlim Shlomo melechus beis hamikdash, nosa Bas Paro. That he married, notice he had the chasana in Yerushalayim on the same night that was held the party to celebrate the completion of Beis Hamikdash, which he did not go to. Went to his own wedding with Bas Paro. Shom Tzalas, Simchas Beis Hamikdash, B'Tzalas Bas Paro. And so there were two bands and celebrations. One was the Klal Yisrael for the Beis Hamikdash, and the other one was Shlomo for his marriage. But also Tzalas Simchas Bas Paro, Yotzim B'Tzalas Beis Hamikdash. And Shlomo's band and music was louder and drowned out the Beis Hamikdash stuff, which is disgusting. Who done Ramlo Dodam? Okay? And both say Shol Makadosh Baruch Hu Machshav L'Achris Yerushalayim. Rabban and Omri, Elif Mini Zemrich Nisel Bas Paro. When they had this chasana, she brought him a band with 1,000 different instruments. And she had each one play for him at the wedding. She would explain, being an Egyptian, this particular instrument is played in praise of this idol, and this one praising that idol, and so forth. So in other words, it was a big sin. I might add that what actually took him down was the rebellion, as we all know, of Yeroboam, which came to fruition in his son's time. And Yeroboam was already in trouble with Shlomo because he told him off, he gave him Musar. And the Chazal say he gave him Musar, that why do you marry Bas Paro, and why are you giving her special karka and blocking the base of Mikdash and things like that. So this Bas Paro business really cost him big time. Okay? So a wiser, if this is true, then already at a young age, Shlomo had sort of messed up in this particular regard. A wiser, though still young Shlomo, may have seen, as he surveyed everything, because he was so smart, Hashem gave him chokmah, you can take the Jews out of Egypt, but you can't take Egypt out of the Jews. If this is when he said, Hishpati eschem benos Yerushalayim, im ta'ir v'im toras havashet hechpotz, he was saying the missing time of Golus Mitzrayim had to be made good. Problem is, it doesn't make sense. Shlomo and the Jews were in what I call their Kodak moment. Everything was perfect. Shlomo was a from king. The Jewish people were in Eretz Yisrael. They had prosperity. Ish tachas gafno v'ish tachas te'eno. They had military security. The economy was good. They have a Beis HaMikdash. You had Ruach HaKodesh. I mean, what do you want? When you and I daven in Shemoneh Esrei, Hashiv Shavtenu Parashana and all that business, you're really saying, whether you realize it or not, let's go back to Shlomo's times. And here, Shlomo's saying it's not good. Why would a young King Solomon adjure them to suffer in the future a gullus? After all, do we not pray for a return to a Shlomo moment? Shlomo in his old age, okay, especially if he was deposed, but young age before anything happened doesn't sound right. And anyway, being Koheles, 3 times in Shir Hashem, when he's young and had everything, you have to say, I think, as follows. Shlomo looks at a Kodak moment when everything was just right, and because he was so wise, God gave him wisdom, he discerns its deficiencies. The Rambam very famously said, I know you know this, that the purpose of the Messianic era was not the Kodak moment, but rather spirituality. The Kodak moment was meant to be the means to the real end of advanced spirituality. What are the last lines of the whole Yad HaChazacha? Lo nisavu navim chachamim motza Mashiach lo kedei sheyishu t'al kol ha'olam, that our forefathers didn't want Mashiach time to rule the world. V'lo kedei sheyirda b'goyim, v'lo kedei sheyinasu osam ha'amim, v'lo kedei shelechol v'lishtas l'smoch, el kedei sheyipenuyim b'toira v'chachmasa, v'lo yim nogasim avatil, kedei sheyizkil chay olam hava. V'lo tozman lo yesham l'rov, lo melchama lo tikin v'tachris, shatov v'ti mushbas harbi, to be plenty of prosperity and no wars. B'chol madanim tzim kafar, and you get whatever you want. V'lo ye'esek kol olam elo adas Hashem b'lvad. So that's a spiritual moment. That's not what the Jews were doing in the time of Shlomo, even though they had the prosperity. You get it? They had the prosperity. I saw a name on a smecha, because I was looking in the Satmar and the other one. And he quotes the Orach Chaim, a Kadosh in Parsha Bahar, where the Orach Chaim says, if the Jews don't use the Kodak moment for spirituality, then that moment will not be the Gula Shlema. The Jews will have to achieve the Gula in another way through suffering. This is in Bahar, where it says, you look up the Orach Chaim there, and he says, Kvargilon Rabbeinu Orach Chaim HaKosh beParshas Bahar, Baruch Kodsho, Tama Davar Mishum, Debe'emes Yesh Shtei Bechinos Bevias HaMashiach. There are 2 possible scenarios for coming a Mashiach, A and B. Bechinas Echos, 1, Romamus V'Gadlus. There's a Mashiach come while Jews are millionaires and they're doing very well. Hu Bechinas Zochar. Or Bechinas Beis, but the other scenario, Mitoch Anius V'Dachkus, out of poverty and suffering. And he goes on to say, if we would have been zochar to use the peace and prosperity for the right way, the way the Rambam says he's supposed to do it, then that would have been the Gula Shlema, because Shlomo had everything going for him. But if that doesn't work out, then we have to do it the other way through Golis, as he puts it, Tocha Batzaras V'Dakas V'Aniyas. Okay? So here is Shlomo Melch at his peak, B'Tukvo, the Kodak moment, the golden age of prosperity and power, who wrote him a Tivsach V'Azo. But the king has been cursed with great wisdom. And what does Shlomo say about the great wisdom he was granted? Yosef Das, Yosef Machos. The more you know, the more painful it is. I know too much. The king discerns the hollow nature of the power and prosperity of his time. The hollowness is reflected in the loss of his imperial possessions, even though it doesn't make a dent in his economic prosperity, which he attains through commerce. The loss of the imperial provinces reflects, obviously, divine displeasure, which the king realizes, though the king lacks the will to curb his own appetites. Shlomo. It is a remarkable situation when you have a king who fluctuates between Ruach HaKodesh and Taivas. Now you think I'm just saying that, whatever. But you don't know the Tanakh. If you look at Perkei Aleph, after it says Shlomo married all these shiksas, in Perkei Aleph, it says, listen to this. I'm just reading what it says in Malachim. Oz yivne Shlomo bama l'chmosh chikutz moav b'hara shal pnei Yisrael. Shlomo built a Zohar church on the Har Zaysim across the street from the Beis HaMikdash. V'lamolach shikutz be'yamim. And he built another church there for Molech. V'chein asel chol nashon chriyas. And he did to other of his wives who wanted churches. Matir zach lahim. They had places where they go for karbonos that are gods. Vayisanav Hashem b'Shlomo. And Hashem got angry, very angry at Shlomo. Ki nato levavo mim Hashem al Yisrael ner b'himayim. His heart was turning away. He was letting them do this. His heart turning away from Hashem. V'tzivo lova al davar hazeh. And Hashem commanded him not to do this. Levilti leches achar elheim achirim. He commanded him not to do this. V'lo shomer says sheitziv Hashem. Shlomo didn't listen. Right? Now you could possibly learn that he's referring to the earlier warning from as I mentioned before. It seems to me that right then and there, when it happens. In his moment of Ruach HaKodesh, the king acknowledges his reign will not be the hoped-for culmination of human history. It will not be the Gula Shlema. Since the Gula Shlema would not take place now, mitoch Ashiris v'gadlus, it would have to take place otherwise, mitoch Tokef Atzaros v'dachkos v'anias. And for that to work, the full dregs of the cup of suffering will have to be drunk. Therefore, Hishpati Eschem B'nos Yushalayim im To'iru im To'uru Es Ad Shetechbats, which is a remarkable scenario indeed. Shir HaShirim, we're told, was written in a state of ecstasy. It says the others are Kodesh and this is Kodesh Kadoshim. Shlomo yearns for Gula Shleimah in his ecstasy. And he's prepared to do what it takes, even if it's a long gullus, which he himself will not live to see. Anyway, that's the best I can make out of it. This is my reply to the question of the Avnei Nezer as best as I can see. The Avnei Nezer himself could only conclude that these three Shavuos did not actually happen in history, but they happened in meta-history, in spiritual. Hishpati Yisrael is not Shlomo, it's Hashem, talking to the Shorish Neshama of Klal Yisrael and the Shorish Neshamas of these different Umas Olam. So in other words, telling them not to jump the gun. So it didn't actually happen in the historical way, but it did happen. Okay? Whether the Shavuos apply nowadays is a separate debate, depending on many variables. As we said, the UN said they could have Israel. Another is whether they're interdependent. In other words, if the Goyim violate their part, they're Mashabed Yosem Mitai, and the Jews don't have to keep their part about Yimrod Be'umas Olam. Although the Satmar Rebbe says that the three are not interdependent. Even if the Goyim break theirs, we got to keep ours. Okay? I just want to conclude by saying something about my mom based on the Galicia lectures I just delivered in Baltimore. My mother was born in 1912. Think about that. A long time ago. I don't know much about her early youth in Bardiov. Just some stories she told. No one's ever heard of Bardiov until I mentioned it on the podcast, and then some people told me they're from there. She was born in 1912 to Hasidic parents. They were sons of Hasidim. I didn't expect you to know this, but Bardiov is in Slovakia, which was the kingdom of Hungary at that time, very close to the Galician border. So really, it's like a satellite of Galicia, not far from Sans. I would use the term Newark and New York, something like that. They're close to each other. So in other words, she lived in Hungary, but brought up like in a Galicianer way. But her father died when she was 5 years old in 1917, my grandfather. I'm from a second marriage after the war. My mother did not have a Jewish education. There was none. Father was dead. She only learned what she learned at home. She did go to public school. in Czechoslovakia, eventually qualifying as an executive secretary. To the degree I ever gave it any thought, I figured it was a result of her being an orphan. But thanks to my recent talks on Galicia, I discovered this was the preferred Hasidic method of female education in that part of the world. Limudei Kiddush no, Limudei Chol yes. Just the other week, I came across a paragraph about Bardiof in Professor Rachel Manikin's book when I was looking up for the Galicia. In Rachel Manikin, who I know, she wrote a book about the rebellion of the daughters and female education on Beis Yaakov and this, that, and the other. The early 20th century. She had a lot of homework. And she quoted in a paragraph, I couldn't believe it, a paragraph of Bardiof, where it says that in this little town where my mother's from, a small place, they started a Beis Yaakov afternoon school after public school in 1934 when she was 22 years old. Wouldn't apply to her. But the school was very controversial in 1934 because the local Sanzer Hasidim fought it tooth and nail. You see, when the Beis Yaakov movement was started by Sarah Schneer, some Hasidic groups like the Ger backed it, but others like the Belzers, I'm talking about in the 20s and 30s, and the Sanzers are very kind, Charkov, this, that, and the other, opposed it tooth and nail, okay? And what they said was public school is okay, Beis Yaakov is treif. Isn't that weird? But that was a different time and place. They have an old article where a guy, one of the Haberstams is saying, my mother was Gavaldic. She had an excellent secular education. She had no Jewish education. He's boasting about that because, Malamed is B'nai Tiflis, but she became a frum Hasidic lady. That's just interesting. Now, therefore, whatever my mother knew, she picked up at home. During the war, she had occasions where she risked her life for Yiddishkeit. I've told that story elsewhere. So I would say it was in spite of her lack of Jewish education. But a Sanzer Chassid would say, no. It's because the system we had in place was right. She learned it from her mother, and that's what stuck in her kishkas. I think that's nuts, but maybe they're right. And of course, since her father was dead, she never had a full Hasidic upbringing. She never really became Hasidish. So from my father's point of view, that was okay, because he was a Litvak. Anyway, there's just a few points I wanted to make on the Ksubis, and I won't keep you any longer. As I said before, the yahrtzeit is tomorrow night, and that's it.